Hello. You are listening to the Carroll Connection with your host, Jared Carroll.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carroll Connection. I am your host, Jared Carroll, here to bring you guys another great episode. I did want to take a chance to shout out last week's episode 93 with Alex Medeiros. He is a health club general manager, and we talked about how when he was younger, he was looking to get into kind of like sports and go through that route to go to college, and it didn't pan out, and it kind of turned him into the fitness industry and how that became kind of like his passion and things like that. We also talked about him traveling, living in Texas. We shared that experience. So it was a really great episode. You can check it out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. So today, for episode 94, bringing in another great guest, Marleigh Dalton.
Thank you for having me.
Glad you could come. So usually the first part of the podcast, I usually go on who you are and what you're doing currently, so the audience can kind of get a little taste for that. So
beautiful. Well, my name is Marleigh. I'm from Pawtucket. I'm 32 years old. Young, I like to say. And I grew up in Pawtucket, and I currently live in Seekonk, and I am a registered nurse.
Perfect. And we'll dive into being a registered nurse, the process, because I know the whole schooling's a whole, yeah, I didn't want to say it, but you could say it for me. We'll get into that. We'll talk about COVID, because obviously that's been a huge impact into hospitals and obviously nurses everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that'll be a great thing. The first part of the podcast, we talk about family dynamics. I think it paints a really great picture for people who are listening to kind of see where you come from, what the structure is, because like we talked about off podcast, that a lot of the time you could see a lot of traits that carry over into our life, because when we're younger, that's usually when we're most impressionable, and it definitely adds a lot of value to the podcast as well, because it just lays the foundation. We build upon that. So you can take the floor of that, obviously whatever you're comfortable with about your family dynamic.
Yeah, sure. So I have an older brother. My mom and dad are both from Pawtucket, and we lived there our entire lives. And my mom is a registered nurse. So naturally, that's where that comes from.
Makes sense.
And my dad was actually a stay-at-home dad, believe it or not. So I think that kind of changed my dynamic growing up a little bit, because most people that I hear, always hear, they have stay-at-home moms, but you don't really hear the stay-at-home dad aspect, which I think has definitely shaped who I am today in some good ways, maybe some bad. But and yeah, we grew up, and then I went to elementary school all in Pawtucket, public schools, and then I grew up. And then I went to high school at St. Ray's in Pawtucket as well.
Interesting. I want to dive into a little bit about the stay-at-home dad stuff, because that is really interesting. I had my mom was stay-at-home, and that's just the way they chose to do their the family dynamic. So, what was that kind of like? Because I'm kind of curious how your dad kind of goes into that role, because I'm a registered nurses do fairly well, so it kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So how did that dynamic work for you? Because obviously when people talk about traditional gender roles, traditional gender roles, what I'm thinking of. The mom stays home, she's the nurturer and all that stuff. So how did that play a role into kind of your development? That kind of seems like an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, it was interesting. I would say my mom was always, up early. She would always wake us up. You have to get ready for school, blah, blah, blah. And she'd say, all right, have the best day, have a good day, make it your best. That was always her signature line every single day growing up. Have a good day, make it your best. So she would leave. Naturally, me and my brother would fall right back to sleep. And then my dad would somehow wake us up, and he'd bring us to school. And then after school, we'd usually I'd walk home or whatever, and he would do all the normal things that you would expect your partner to do while the other one's at work. So my mom would come home from work, dinner was made, he'd do the laundry, he did the cleaning, he just did all the things that need to be done at the house while my mom went to work every single day. But my mom was really good. On the weekends, she never missed a soccer game, or she never missed me and my brother both ran track. She never missed any track cross country events, where my dad would mostly bring us to practice or things like that. But he would go to a lot of events, but not every single one. My mom never missed one on the weekends, because she had weekends off.
That's really impressive too. Because I obviously with the schedule that registered nurses have, is very chaotic a lot of the times with scheduling. You're working very long shifts. It's very demanding. So
I should say my mom worked in a hospital up until like I was little, and she had a position open up as a case manager for an insurance company. So she actually is a different type of kind of nurse, not like the typical working on a floor in a hospital. She works for an insurance company. So she was more of a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Okay. Yeah. So did that transition happen as you guys kind of got a little bit older?
No, before we were like
born. Yeah. Okay. So that actually probably played out really well, especially on weekends and stuff, so that she could be there. That makes it okay. That makes more sense.
Or we might have been little. I don't know, but it was like I don't remember her ever working in a hospital. Put it that way.
Having the both parents still in the picture, though, and we were talking a lot about this off the podcast. I always say is having two parents doesn't matter really gender. Obviously, we're more fluid nowadays and more accepting. But having two parents in the household to raise children is so beneficial, and like you notice it when you start to get older, whether it's forming relationships, communicating with friends, getting jobs, working in the workplace, all these different aspects of life build upon the initial foundation of family. Mm-hmm. And we're most impressionable. I think the ages are like when you're first born to like 5, 6, 7. That's really when like the formative years start to happen, and a lot of that stuff is subconscious. And I've learned a lot of this stuff through therapy and getting more into touch with like my spiritual side and trying to like dive into these aspects of myself that were less favorable, I should say, to forming positive relationships with people, work relationships, romantic relationships. So when I'm looking at family dynamic, I tend to, for my purposes, I look at the parent structure, because way my structure was having my dad, he worked it was more like a 7 to 3, going a little bit earlier and do all that stuff. And my mom stayed home, and it was so beneficial having a parent there to help raise the children. It doesn't matter what parent it is. And I think it's great that you're on and you talk about how your dad stayed at home, because it breaks down that barrier that the mother has to stay home, when it doesn't have to work like that. And it shows, I mean, you're a fantastic person. It shows that it works. Like the formula works.
It works.
And like, I think a lot of people, I think we're getting closer and closer towards that being a little bit more of a normal thing, because the whole traditional gender roles is kind of out there, and that's what people kind of stick by. And it's obviously breaking down in front of our faces as women are getting into the workforce. Women are working more than ever. Women are more educated than ever, which is fantastic. So now we're getting into this place where things are getting more and more towards an equal footing. And now it goes back towards the relationship side of it, is like, how do these dynamics work? And things are going to have to start changing in the way we look for partners and how we raise children. So it's good to hear that it worked in your scenario, because when I've talked to a variety of people who have one parent or the other, you could tell there's certain characteristics that tend to seep into, whether it's subconscious or conscious, from that parent only being there a certain amount of time. Because when you're a single parent, you have to work and provide. Yeah. So it can be very difficult.
For sure.
I want to turn into kind of like the hobbies and sports that you did as kids, like with your siblings and all that stuff. Was there anything specific, whether it could be music or a sport? Like, you could take the floor.
Always sports. Like from little, I played soccer since I was 4 years old. Soccer was like my main sport when I was a little kid. My brother played soccer, baseball, basketball, like a seasonal kind of thing. Mm-hmm. My dad tried to get me into basketball. He put me in like every league he could. I just hated it. It was not for me. He had me in like an all boys league at one point, and I would like just make any excuse to get out of having to go to a game. I hated basketball. Like, I like to go and shoot around, but put me in a game and I'm like, I don't know what to do. I'm lost. And then we both ran track, like cross country in junior high. And then we both continued to do that in high school, which I kind of have a little bit of a regret. I wish I would have played soccer a little bit longer. I kind of stopped after I was like out of junior high. But I loved track and cross country too. My brother was a really, really good runner. He still is to this day. He can just pick up after not running for months and go and run like a 6-mile run, and he's fine. And I'm like run a mile now and I have like asthma attacks. So so that was our sports. I mean, I'm now I don't really do any like sports, but I just work out and keep fit that way.
Yeah, and we can dive into the fitness too, because that's something I definitely want to talk about. It's something I try to talk about pretty consistently on the podcast, just because when you're talking about mental health, fitness is like right there behind it. And I wish those two would be more openly talked about together, especially since like the COVID stuff, it kind of seems like that was not really talked about too much. But in terms of sports, like part of the reason I love talking about it because it's usually the earliest points where we're forming those relationships, we're learning how to share, we're learning teamwork is valuable and things of that nature. And it's awesome to hear someone like yourself too that did play soccer or played a sport in general, because you notice the difference between the children who didn't play sports and the ones who did, because a lot of the time they tend to just be a little bit more like antisocial, a little bit more to themselves, a little bit more reserved, and obviously nothing wrong with that, but like to peel the layer back a little bit and to look into why. And a lot of it is that whole camaraderie thing where you're playing with other people, you're learning that aspect of it. Kind of what were some of the lessons that you may have picked up early on or throughout playing soccer? Because obviously there's different lessons for different sports.
Soccer, that's a good question. I would say that soccer was definitely held me accountable because I had to go to practice, a couple times a week, and like always had to show up for my team and like the games. We actually had a really good team when I want to say like maybe seventh grade. I played competitive soccer, and we had an undefeated team for for Pawtucket. And we were so good. And then we lost the first round of the playoffs. It was heartbreaking. I think that might have been my last year, but we had the best coach. He worked for a jewelry company, and every time you scored a goal, he'd like give you this little heart with your name on it. And it was like a gold little heart. It's just like, I still think I have some of them, honestly, from way back then, but I don't know. It probably held me accountable. It taught me how to be a good team player, and just make new friends. I mean, I made so many friends through the soccer community. I feel like I was always there. I became a referee, to make it was like $15 a game, and I thought it was like I was rich. But so I don't know. That would probably be just like hold me accountable to go to practices and games, and it's a dedication to be dedicated to it, committed to it. My parents were like, "You can join a sport, but you have to go. Like, you're not going to just join and then blow it off."
Yeah, and
it's really difficult for me for basketball because I was like, "You have to go," but I hated it so much. I think finally I broke down. I was like, "I just hate it," and he finally let me quit. But that was the only sport that I ever was allowed to quit. Once I signed up for something, they paid for it. They're like, "You're going."
Valid. That makes sense. But the accountability aspect's so crucial. Glad you hit on that, because I am so big, and especially as I've gotten older, accountability is everything. Like being self-aware, being honest with yourself, and sports hold you accountable. Like if you're slacking in certain areas, especially when you play team sports, your teammate suffers, not just you that suffers. So that's a huge thing. Going to the practices, going to the games, like this aspect of consistency kind of always comes right underneath of accountability. Is if you're going to be accountable, you also need to be consistent.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm so big on. And what you kind of hit on too, without even hitting on it, is how you lost. Failure. I think sports teach failure.
They do, and for sure.
I think it's
heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I still think about it. I just told this story not that long ago.
I still think about I remember this baseball. I was in it was like all stars for baseball. And when we were 13, 14, we first played Auburn, Massachusetts, and they just kicked our ass up and down, left and right. And then we're like, when we turn 16, it's going to be our turn. Mm-hmm. So we waited till the 15, 16 All-Stars. We got all the guys back together. We went into it.
Did you win?
We'll get to it. So the first time, we beat them.
Yep.
And we're getting further along, and we had to play them again. We lose the second time at home. They just honestly beat the brakes off us at home. Third game, we had to go to them now since we lost. And we get out there, and at the time, the Twins, they were both on our team. I'm not going to name drop them. They were away for a trip, and they came back just in time for this game. Literally, as we're playing the game, they're coming through the parking lot, and we're going nuts. We're screaming, getting loud, and we're like, the Twins are here, and we're freaking out. And we get in. One of them starts pitching. We start doing good. It's a close game, nick and knack all the way through. Get towards the end, we're down in I think it was a run or two. And we get bases loaded. I forget who got up to the plate. And there was one out. and we need one more just to tie the game. Hits it to left field. Left fielder makes a fantastic catch. But unfortunately for the person on third base, just starts running home.
Perfect.
And I'm like, everyone's like screaming, go back, go back, go back.
Oh, because he caught it.
He caught it.
Oh,
So he didn't tag up. He just started running. And everyone's screaming, go back. And they throw it, get him out at third, game over.
No.
And literally that game, if we won that game, we would have went to play the championship of that game at Lowell Spinner Park. You win that, you go to like the Senior League World Series, the adult version of the Little League World Series. So we were literally like one game from getting to that point. And then that team goes on, they win the game at Lowell, and then they go on to score the most runs ever scored in the first game they played at the Senior League World Series. They didn't win it, but like they made a good run, and every time we're just like, damn, that could have been us. Like it's like, and that sits burned in my brain forever. Like
that's how we were. We had beaten every team that season, and then we get to the first round of the playoffs and lost. I was like, how do you go through the whole season undefeated? And then the first round, I remember like this girl we were so upset. I'll never forget it.
I bring up another failure. Like my whole sports career is just constant failure. Yeah. So like everything outside, you can't face me. Like I've just except dating. I'm not gonna lie. but in terms of I was playing like farm league baseball. Like we were like, I forget how old we were. We were so young. Like probably even before middle school. Like probably like 5th grade or some bullshit. Like we were like undefeated. We literally had like pitching machines at the time. We weren't even pitching to us. We had pitching machines. And apparently there was a rule change in the book. As soon as you get to playoffs, you increase the speed. Oh. We didn't know that. So, and I'll never forget this. Like I had like screensavers on my desktop, like 13-1 or 13-0 or whatever it was. Like I was so soup that we were like mad good. We lose the final game of the season. This one team, we're like, damn. All right, whatever. We got the playoffs. We play that same team the first round. We lose them again. No. And I was like, what
the tough part about like when you're little, like I feel like in, like football, but in baseball now, like in the major leagues, they get like a few games, you know, not then. And when you're young, you get one and done.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I still remember it to this day, and like it's the failures too that kind of stick with you, and like they're valuable learning points because at the end of the day, it's just a game.
Right.
So you take what you can from those aspects, and as I got into high school, started playing football and stuff like that more seriously. I had a great coach, Vernon Crawford, would always kind of hold us accountable, would teach us life lessons while we're playing the game of football, and that's why I've always loved football and I've always favored football. Just the life lessons you learn through it. I mean, I always say it's like a game of war. Yeah. I mean, you're literally you're throwing your body against other people.
It's my favorite sport to watch.
Love that. Go Pats. But it's just the like you said too, I mean, the team building, the aspect of just having friends. I mean, I still have friends from when I was like young. I literally, not last week, but the week before, Johnny Costa, shout out him, episode 92. We played Seekonk Tiger football together before they were even Seekonk Warriors. Oh, really? And I hadn't seen him probably since then. Like it'd been years, and we were able to reconnect on a podcast. But like that goes to the whole point of just the friends you make from sports sometimes end up being some of the ones you can keep for life.
Yeah.
So the value of that is so very important. And I want to turn into the high school aspect. As you get into high school, you're probably going through the day-to-days. I mean, high school can obviously be stressful as it is. You get towards your senior year, and you're looking at college and all the other options. What was your reason for going to college?
I think I just was the thing to do at the time. I didn't really think about it. Honestly, I went to Rhode Island College straight out of high school, and I did terrible. I hated it. I'm more of like an in-person learner, like to like do things with my, hands and things like that. To sit in a classroom all day and just stare at a professor is just not my cup of tea. But I left Rhode Island College after, I think it was like maybe a year and a half. And I was like, I need to do something. Like I need to start over. So I started over at CCRI, took all the same classes all over again, passed them all, and then applied for their nursing program. I always knew I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a teacher when I was little, but that changed. I was like, I got a little bit older. And I didn't end up getting into their program at CCRI, which was pretty heartbreaking, but it wasn't meant to be. I applied to St. Joseph's School of Nursing, which is a 3-year diploma program. So it's a little bit, it's not an associate, it's a diploma. They're pretty much comparable.
Yeah.
But my mom and my aunt had both graduated from St. Joe's, which is like not a common school you hear about. It actually closed down a couple of years ago. It was really sad, but it was a great program. I met some amazing people who are amazing nurses now. We started with like 52 people, I think, and we only graduated with like 26. So like half the class. It was very small, which helped me out because being in a big class, I like get distracted. Mm-hmm. So the smaller classes, the better. And then after I graduated St. Joseph's School of Nursing, I went on back to Rhode Island College to get my bachelor's degree. And when I went back, my classes are still there from when I had did terrible. So my GPA was like a 2. Maybe not that bad, but it was pretty bad. And after, I finished all my nursing classes there and got my bachelor's degree. It went up a little bit, but still my bachelor's GPA is not that great, only because I did so terrible when I was younger. It took me a long time to get through college and to get my bachelor's degree, but I just took my time, did what I had to do, and eventually was able to succeed at it.
What was because I know you mentioned teaching, was there any specific reason why you didn't go that route and you chose nursing instead? Was there any deciding point?
Idea. I think back to it, I'm like, they have summers, teaching, they're under so much stress right now, the teachers. I give them so much credit.
Nursing is
No, I know, but I give teachers the utmost respect as well, because they, especially through the pandemic, having to deal with online and in person, I don't know how they do it. I don't know why I didn't go the teaching route. They have summers off, and so it's probably the reason why I thought I'd like it. But I don't know. There's 7 nurses on my mom's side of the family. So my aunt, my 3 cousins, my uncle, my mom, and me. So it's just in the blood, I think.
Yeah, that played definitely a huge role into that.
Yeah.
With the whole, nursing school as it is, everyone that I've had interviewed that's come on the podcast that has been a nurse always talks about the degree of difficulty. Mm-hmm. How was it for yourself going through that whole rigorous kind of process? Because it seems like it kind of weeds out the people who aren't going to make it. Yeah. And it seems like it's a very, a lot of people, obviously we're talking pre-pandemic too. A lot of people were getting into nursing too. I don't know if the enrollment rate is still as high as it was pre-pandemic, but from what I know, it was everyone was being a nurse prior to the pandemic.
Yeah, it was difficult. I know that my first year, I put a lot of pressure on myself, but I also worked full-time during it. So I just had no life. Monday through Saturday was between school, clinical, work, and then Sunday was a study day. So I had no life for the entire 3 years that I went to school. But I think over time, I stopped putting so much pressure on myself about my grades. I obviously wanted to pass, but my goal was just at that point to pass. I always joke and say C's get degrees, but not one person that I've gotten a job from has asked me what I got in med-surg class in freshman year of nursing school, So obviously it's important. Some people really value their grades and they want to get a 4.0. To me, that was not my top priority. My priority was just to get through the program, and I did it. And so that was my, thought process going through it. So I stopped putting so much pressure on the actual grades, and it was just just do the best you can, just get the grade that you need to get, and you'll get through it.
That makes a lot of sense too. With the degree of difficulty of nursing, it's a lot of you're learning. There's a lot of material being thrown at you in the course of those. It's kind of, realistically, it's a short period of time, and then you get placed into a real world event, obviously, and we'll get into that in a second. But I kind of want to ask this: what would your advice be to nurses who are coming up? Obviously, since you've gone through a pandemic, since you've gone through nursing school, there's a lot that's been happening. So, kind of, what would be your advice to someone who wanted to get into nursing?
I would say, 1, don't do it for the money, because it's not a career, unfortunately, that pays the best. Obviously, everybody talks about travel nursing, which is what I do now, but I didn't do it for the money part. Obviously, that was an added bonus. I would say you have to actually like taking care of people. You have to deal with the public, and they're not happy because they're sick. So you have to not take things personal. When you go through school, just really concentrate just to get through it. It's tough. I've had a few mental breakdowns. I broke down. My ex had eaten my 4 lobster raviolis one night, and I got home after studying all day, and I lost it because you're on edge the entire your entire schooling. You're just on edge because it's so stressful. But people do it. We get through it, and there's amazing nurses out there today because they just took their time and didn't rush. Don't go into school too early too. I feel like out of high school, a lot of people go right into, like, they think they need to decide on a career and they think they need to go to school right away. And take your time and wait, because I couldn't imagine being a nurse at like 23 years old. Like, some people graduate and they're so young, and I'm like, that's great if it's for you, but if it's not, then take your time and like wait until you're ready.
I think that's great advice, because I try to say that a lot too. Like, I only took like a semester off. I had my own circumstances. I was looking at military and things like that, and things didn't pan out. So the benefit of working a little bit, I got a little bit of like job experience. I worked at Stop and Shop, and I met a lot of great people through that experience. But taking time off before I made that decision, like where to go to school, because my mindset before was always like, I'm just gonna go to the military. Like, fuck everything else. I don't care. Like, I'm going to the military. And when that path didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, it kind of gave me a lot of anxiety. I was like, well, what do I have to do now? I have to figure out the rest of my life, and you don't. Like,
they put so much pressure. I feel like so much pressure on people when they're like kids. You're kids. You're in high school. Like, I don't know. You have your whole life to decide. Like, give yourself some time. It's important, I think, to go to school. Like, well, not so much. Like, there's so many good trade jobs. I mean, you don't have to go to college. They can get some great jobs not going to school. It's not for everybody. It was really difficult for me. I'm just not a person that likes to sit in a classroom and take tests, like write a paper. It's one reason why I've held back from going to get my master's, because it's a lot of writing of a lot of papers, and it's not for me.
Yeah, I've never been I'm good at school, but I've never been like a fan of schooling, because I like to say that even if you go to school, it doesn't mean you're educated. Like, a lot of the stuff that I've learned in my field of accounting finance, I've learned on the job.
Yeah.
Like, you learn the basics in school, which are great. I don't think it's worth the money that I paid for it, but you're paying for the paper that allows you to get into those facilities and those institutions that will hire you. And like, I understand that process. I wish that could get fixed all around across all industries, where the degrees shouldn't be the standard and all that stuff. And a lot of the time I've noticed when I do these jobs that they don't even really ask for proof of degree or anything like that. So like, they're obviously probably checking boxes and all that stuff, but they never ask for the paper. They don't care about your GPA a lot of the time. Obviously there's probably certain institutions that do, but almost every job that I've had never cared about it. And I wish they didn't put as much pressure on that as they do, because especially with the price of school as it is now, and it's only going up, it only keeps going up, which is ridiculous, because a lot of the stuff, like you just said, you learn on the job.
Right.
And I can imagine it's very similar with nursing. I mean, you could learn and read all the textbooks in the world, but none of that's going to prepare you for a pandemic or something like that.
Good foundation, but then you learn most of it when you get a job and go on orientation on your job. I always tell people too, because we have to take obviously boards at the end. So we graduate college, but you don't get a license until you pass your boards, which is like even more stressful, because you just spent all this money and time, passed school, got a degree, but you don't have a license until you pass that one last test. And it's so stressful. But I always tell people, just study as hard as you can. Like, all the nursing students, we have a lot of nursing students that come through the hospital, and just do it. You just have to do it once, and that's it. Like testing. You only have to take that test once. Just do the best you can on it, pass it, and then you never have to worry about it again.
Yeah, that's a plus of that too. Yeah. Now I want to dive into, you get into 2020. The pandemic hits. How do you manage going through a pandemic as a nurse? Like, I've talked to a couple different nurses and their experience, but I'm curious to hear yours.
So I worked on a floor. I was on a step down unit. So it's not IC level. It's not like a regular floor. It's in between for 2.5 years. And then I started traveling nurse before the pandemic. So I started traveling in 2019, like June. So I had 6 months of travel nurse experience. And then in January 2020, I started working at Brigham and Women's in Boston. And I remember sitting with a girl who was training me, and she was like, hey, have you heard of this virus, blah, blah, blah. And she was like so into viruses. And I remember being like, wow, it's only a matter of time before this hits Boston. And then it hit. And I worked in their float pool. So they kind of just put you wherever they need nurses that day, or whatever role you can help out in, kind of. And it was kind of crazy to see the hospital prepare for like the virus, because they didn't know how many people like were going to come in sick. They had no idea. So they shut down like the operating rooms. I think they turned they added like an extra 200 to 300 beds just in case or something. It was crazy. But there were a lot of hard days. I mean, I didn't know. Hard part of just being in a float pool is that you don't know what you're going to get. Like, it's not like, you go to work, the same people, you have like a regiment when you get into work. It was more like you're going to go into work and you might be a nurse that day and thrown into a COVID floor, or you might go on a regular floor. Like, I had no idea. So there was a few days that I had like a couple mental breakdowns because it was just tough. We just didn't know. The doctors, they didn't really know how to treat it as well as they do now. And you have all the gear. Like, I remember I had like one image where there's this one hallway and it was just nurses all along like the sides of the hallway, and you just saw everybody like gowned up in precaution like gowns and their like face masks and shields, and I'm like, what is happening? Because this was not the nursing that I had signed up for or been a part of for years. But I think over time everybody just stuck together. Like, people were really praising the healthcare workers, and I think that helps like the morale a little bit, which has kind of gone away, which is kind of sad. But we all support each other. I feel like nurses are really good at being supportive friends too. And you kind of can vent to them, and they're all going through the same thing you're going through, which really helps. So we kind of just stuck it out. And now it's like an everyday, you get a COVID patient and it's like another sick patient that you're just used to taking care of, in my eyes anyway.
Yeah, it seems like in that scenario, it's kind of like almost sounds like a nightmare when you're picturing all this and like this, like you said, this is not what I initially signed up for.
Right.
Did it ever at any point question your career choice? Did you ever waver in that?
No, never. Not that I remember anyway. I mean, I'm sure there's moments where I'm like, why am I doing this? But
Yeah.
just in the heat of the moment. But I just love nursing. I mean, I've always loved helping people, and I love not even just helping people, but I love the science behind watching someone who's sick and like knowing that certain medications and treatments can fix somebody. Like, it's just crazy how the human body works. And when you like look at labs and CAT scans and MRIs and just see how things happen, and then see how the doctors and the teams work together to fix like a person, it's like the most unique car you've ever seen sent to like the body shop to get fixed. It's crazy. So I've seen, obviously comes time where you see a lot of bad things happen. I've seen, like, if I could have a TV of all the images that I've seen, people would be like, oh my God, I can't believe that that's what happens inside those hospital doors. But like I said, you just kind of lean on each other and get through it.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like too, you awaken to like the realities of like the world. You're seeing people at sometimes their lowest points, and like it's a difficult job that doesn't. I mean, it's gotten more respect obviously since the pandemic, and it shined the light on healthcare workers. But as things are starting to turn to more like normalcy, you've seen, like you said, the morale starting to drop down, and people are wanting more pay, and they want as deservingly so, and it's frustrating to see that the lack of importance that we put on healthcare. It's like we highlighted it for those 2 years, and then like all of a sudden, all right, back to normal, and then like everyone just like turned their back, and it's like
it's crazy because I think nurses need it now more than ever. Like, they are so like just drained. They're so burnt out. I mean, I'm lucky. The floor I work on now is fairly well staffed, and like the ratios are really good, but there's some hospitals that it's not the case. I mean, you have 6 patients, and like, how do you're one person? It's really difficult. And I feel for the people that have to go through that every day.
Yeah, I mean, it weighs on your mental health, obviously, and like that is something that, I mean, I don't think that was even talked about, the mental health of like healthcare workers. Like, we talk about the health of like the patients, but are we talking about like the care of the actual healthcare workers? And that's something that's another thing that's gone under the radar and not talked about enough. And is there like, maybe you guys, obviously being such a close team, do you guys like support each other in that aspect? Because obviously, like, when you're seeing so much, I mean, I hate to say it, but like this negativity and like in health and like sickness and illness, that weighs on your mental health. When you might see people in crazy accidents or going through surgeries or passing on to the next life. Like, is there support groups within that, or do you guys just lean on each other in those moments? Like, kind of like,
I think there are support groups available, but it's not like mandatory. It's not mandatory or anything like that. But yeah, it's tough. We see a lot of things. And it's hard, I think, too, because patients forget that we're people too, like a lot of them are very emotionally abusive. They are physically abusive at times. And it's not really like you walk into, I always say there's more security at Fenway or Gillette Stadium than there is at a hospital. I mean, you can walk into the hospital with a big backpack and no one, they're not allowed to search it. It's crazy to me. I'm like, how can you have a knife in there and no one would know? We wouldn't know.
No, that is actually crazy.
Where's the protection for us? I always get, and it's always a topic I always think about. I've had patients that have had histories of not being a stand-up citizen and they come in, and we just don't know. I mean, you just don't know.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really interesting topic too, because like you don't hear about that side of it because like when you're in a hospital, you're treating everyone that walks through the door, but you don't know who that person is.
Yeah.
And that can be kind of scary because you really don't know the type of people that walk through your door every single day. And you're there with the best interest of trying to help people. Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes sense too, like from the patient side, that sometimes they're not the nicest because they're going through what they're going through and obviously doesn't warrant the behavior or anything like that, or doesn't condone it. But it's an interesting kind of like tightrope that you're walking to, where you have to kind of put on this face for your patients, even if something in your own personal life is going on. And like kind of like you said, like we don't look at nurses as people. We see them as nurses.
Right.
And that is a tough problem. Is we're trying to, I think as a society, we need to get to the place where we look at people as humans, not just their roles as what they're doing. Like same thing with police officers or firefighters or nurses. Like,
well, it's crazy. Like if you were to hit a police officer, you get arrested. But if you hit a nurse, when have you heard that? Like,
yeah,
you don't really
you're
hear
right
about it. You think I've never gotten hit at work? I can tell you right now. Sometimes the patients aren't always mentally there. That they're not. Obviously, there's issues that happen, and they're not in the right state of mind. But there are times where they are, and they're very like. If you are sitting there and swearing at a police officer nonstop, you're probably going to get in trouble for it eventually, right? Not in healthcare. So if I work with somebody who's swearing at me nonstop, I'm with them for 12 hours. Like, think about that. Do you go to work and get sworn at for 12 hours?
No, that's that. Yeah. No, that's actually a very interesting point too, because there is a line with police officers or like you go into a business, like you're not going to be able to consistently yell and swear at the employee. At a certain point, you're going to get kicked out. So like that is an interesting.
But no one gets kicked out of a hospital.
Yeah, no.
I mean, we can call security. Of course, there's security in the hospital that we can call to like help if a patient's wilding out. But every day, like if there's not really a good reason to call security, they can talk to you however they want.
Yeah, because like even what you said, at a point there's more security at a Fenway game than at a Red Sox game than at a hospital.
I can't even get into Gillette with like a clutch bag. Never mind, but like people come in with suitcases, and I'm like, what is in there?
Yeah, no, that's actually
no idea. I think about it a lot, but I mean, it's not that anything has ever happened to me. There have been instances happen, especially more in emergency rooms. I feel like I think a nurse was attacked not that long ago in Massachusetts and got pretty hurt from it.
Yeah, I mean, you really don't know who these people are, and they're allowed to bring in kind of whatever. Like, it seems like that'd be a pretty standard thing to put, like maybe some like a metal detector in a hospital just before they come in.
Have you ever seen one?
No, like that's kind of crazy to think about. Like, I've never actually like thought about that, and yeah, and especially because like the times we live in now, like they are. I would say they're safer than they have been, obviously, than past, but like. People are wild. People will do some crazy stuff, and like
it's gonna take a big instance, something to happen for that to go into effect, I think. But I mean, there was a doctor that was shot, I think, in Boston a couple of years ago and was killed by a patient. I mean, it's happened, so it's weird to me that I don't see I just don't ever see it.
No, because I mean, even like looking at the war in Ukraine currently, I mean. They try to talk about not targeting hospitals. I mean, it's kind of like a place where people like they try not to, but then you see it happening. So like, it could be like it sucks that it would take an event for something to change. I mean, that's usually how things happen. Unfortunately, is like you need something to happen to inspire change. But I mean, that's not really inspiring at that point. It's kind of a poor choice of words. But like, you know what I mean? Yeah. It sucks that would be the case for that. Turning to like the mental health aspect of nursing, like. what are ways that you kind of do to kind of like decompress from that? I know you've mentioned stuff off the podcast, but obviously.
The one good thing I feel about nursing is once you leave the hospital, you can leave it at the hospital. So for me, I leave work and I don't have to think about that entire day. So that kind of aspect kind of helps, unless an event happened and it kind of can come home with you. But for the majority, like I see people who are in careers in sales, for example, like my boyfriend works in sales and he's constantly, not always, but like he has his phone on him, or if he leaves, like he's like, I don't want to miss a call. Like I feel like it's a little bit always there. Whereas me, I'm like, I left work and I don't have to worry about a phone call because I'm not going to get one until I go back to work the next day or whenever. So I think that helps. I think of that often. I try to leave my work at work and then I shut off my brain from the hospital once I leave. And then I do things like I obviously work out. I spend a lot of time with friends and family. That's kind of my vice. I love to like hang out and be around people who I love. And that really helps my mental health.
Yeah, I think the key part, I think the really good part, I might even quote that at some point, is leave work at work.
Yeah.
Like, I think that would be a good advice for a lot of people because
it's hard to do
in
certain industries for sure.
Because you want to, I mean, especially something like sales, like I've even dealt with it in my industry where, especially when it gets to year end or like quarters or things like that, like it's hard to leave work at work because like you're kind of on call a little bit and like it follows you. So that would be a really good advice to a lot of people because I mean, it can negatively affect, I mean, it does. I'm not even gonna say it can, it definitely does affect your mental health because no one wants to be working 24/7. Like no one wants that.
No.
But in terms of the fitness stuff, I mean, that's always a very positive thing that I try to talk about on the podcast a lot because I always like to say, if you struggle with anxiety or depression or anything like that, if you're not even working out or moving your body in any aspect, you're not giving yourself a fighting chance.
Right.
Because a lot of the time after I work out, you feel all those chemicals releasing in your body. You feel happier. You feel a little bit boosting your mood. And I think if people could just feel that, because a lot of people, and I understand when you're depressed, when you're in those, I mean, like actual depression, you don't want to do anything.
No.
So
that's me in the winter.
Yeah.
I don't know why I live in Massachusetts. I really say it all the time.
Hey, you're a travel nurse.
I know. I could leave.
Florida's calling.
I know. I think about it. I tell everybody, I'm like, I don't know why I live here. Because I love the summer here, love the spring, love the fall. The winter months, I struggle. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to exercise. It's hard. It's hard to get motivated when the weather is like negative. The weather is like 10 degrees and you're like, yeah, let me go to the gym. I'm like, it's freezing. I'm just cold. I'm like, I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to start my car. I don't want to clean out the snow. I hate the winter. I love it. Yeah, I hate it. I hate it.
It's funny. We always hate on New England weather, but we never leave.
We never leave. I know.
I think the seasons too are like the plus because like I lived in Texas and shit, you get seasons are like snap, it's done. Like, so like, yeah, I mean, I think it also makes our character a little bit better, like we're a little tougher people. Like we go through this shit.
A little meaner.
Yeah, well, you could say that. Like I tried not to say that, but yeah.
When you lived in Georgia, were the people nice there?
Georgia was the South. So like it was interesting, but they were nicer. I'd say Texas was the place where I really felt that true Southern hospitality.
Really?
Georgia,
it's well, no, they get cold weather too, I guess.
Now they do because I mean climate change.
But I don't know. It's for me. It's so hard to get motivated to go out and do something in the winter.
Yeah, no. I mean, I got everything in my house. I never leave. I got my podcast, I got my work, I got my gym. Like I don't even leave my house. Like I'm good. It's like and I'm a fall baby. I love the fall. I mean, fellow Scorpio, so you understand. I think it's the best time of the year, and I think there's no other place like it other than New England. Just especially
I agree with you. That one
you got from. And I always like to like joke with people because like when you live in like our area, you have Boston, you have Providence, you have Newport, you even have Bristol, but you also have New York's not too far away. You have Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. You have mountains. Like you have everything you can need all up here in all the 4 seasons and all within drivable distances. When you're in Texas, you could drive 8 hours and you're still in Texas. Like
I know, isn't that crazy?
Like it is one of the most unique states that I've lived in and visited, period, because the culture just varies completely. I lived in downtown Fort Worth, and that was Texas. Like, people will talk about Austin, will talk about Houston. Fort Worth was like cowboy shit. Like, there's cowboys. Like, you go to the stockyards and like they got people riding bulls and like going down the streets and all that stuff. It's like
I recently went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and it was the same thing. Like, they have a lot of like, we went to a rodeo, and it was such a cool experience.
Yeah.
People live like that kind of lifestyle, and the ranches out there are huge.
Oh my God. Like,
the land is like, it's just cows everywhere.
Cost of living so much cheaper. Like, it's
well, you'd think that, but it was to go to Jackson Hole was expensive. It's expensive there.
There, yeah. I mean,
like I think Kanye West
oh,
owns
yeah,
a house out
yep,
there. Like,
yep.
the land out there is millions.
I mean, we
not
got people like that moving out there. That's going to drive the cost.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
people are like, why is he moving there? And then like people look into it and then you see it. And it's like, damn, that's actually really nice.
If you like, you said you like hiking.
Yeah.
Highly recommend to go out there.
Okay. Put that on my list.
Beautiful, beautiful areas out there. And Yellowstone is just unbelievable.
Yeah. Didn't you guys traveled out there recently? Yeah.
We went to Yellowstone and we did Jackson Hole in Idaho. We stayed in a teepee in a tent that had like a king size bed in it. It was at night, all you heard was wolves. It was crazy.
That's sick.
Yeah. The tent thing it's a little difficult for me. The teepee I liked because it had like electricity in it.
Yeah.
But the tent was a little rough. But I had a good time. It was an experience. I've never done anything like that before. I'm usually like, send me to Florida and I'll sit on a beach.
Beach, yeah.
So like, to me, a vacation is a beach, but that's like, we like hiked. So we did like a 9-mile hike. It was incredible.
Yeah, I want to go out there so bad. Like, that part of the country. And that's why I've been like flirting with the idea of like maybe moving out there and just so it could be easier to explore living closer out there. It just sucks. I love family and friends. Like, that's just such like the pull on that. I mean, it's part of the reason I came back. I mean, and if I was to go away, when I look at the podcast, I don't know. I could do virtual, but part of the reason I never wanted to do virtual was because I want to see people in person.
Right.
Like, that's part of the thing we're missing in society.
Take a trip out there. You don't have to live out there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Like, part of me is like that impulsiveness just wants to like pack everything up and just go.
We did meet a guy who was from Texas, and I think he was from Texas, and he moved out there. He was like, I was just going to come for like a summer, and he's been there for like 2 years since because that's how much he loves it out there.
It's so hard. Like, Texas forever has a piece of my heart. Like, that part of the country, they take so much pride in being from Texas. Like, it's their personality, low-key. Like, it's so diverse. Like, I would say like New England's pretty diverse with the people, especially you get into cities in general. But out there, you're meeting everyone, the type of food, the culture. It's just like, one side you have city, and then you go to another side, it's straight country. Right, it's like, it's a unique experience. And someone that's a travel nurse, I would highly recommend, not just Texas, but like in general, like leaving the state, because you could always come back. Like, I think we talked about a little bit off record, that the contracts are usually fairly quick in terms of months. So like,
months, yep.
Yeah, so like,
it's on the list of things to do.
Yeah, it's definitely, as someone that has left and come back, definitely worth it. I always try to say that to people, especially in a career like that. I mean, you go do that nursing in another state. I mean, you're gonna meet so many amazing people too. That's crazy. Like, if I had the opportunity to do my job and just travel like that, I would be like all over that. That's such a benefit. Like, that's definitely nice.
I know a lot of travel nurses, and like one of them I'm friends with, she's in Alaska right now. Like, another one's in California. Just people I've met through traveling or locally. So I got a kid I work with from Colorado. Like, they're all over. I'm like, why did you come to Massachusetts during the winter? You know what I mean? But I tell them like, you have to stay here for the summer. But they're all from Ohio. Like, they're from all over. Yeah. So I know I'm like, I need to get out there and go to another state. And that's my goal eventually, if once some personal things can work themselves out. But we'll get there.
Yeah. With terms of travel nursing, what makes it different than just being like a typical nurse just at the hospital? Like, what's the difference there? So
I will sign a contract I have an agency that I work for. So they have like a list of contracts that are available and all across the country. So I can pick anywhere I want to go. Once I find a contract that it seems like up my alley, I'll send it to my recruiter. She'll get in touch with whoever she gets in touch with and like send me back like the price that they're paying and how long the contract's for, and if it's for like day shift or night shift or a combination of both. And then once I sign the contract, I get like a day of training, and then I just start working right away. And then I work for about 3 months, and then my contract's over and I'm done with that hospital. Whereas if you're a staff nurse, you get a job at a hospital, you get 3 months of training, which is what I had gotten when I first became a nurse. That's why it's really hard for like new grads to become a travel nurse, because you don't get an orientation. Mm-hmm. So I always recommend, if you want a travel nurse, you should at least have at least a year and a half on a floor. I did about 2.5 years before I started travel nursing. But there's pros and cons to both. Everybody sees travelers make so much money. I'm like, yeah, it's great, but we also don't know anybody when you go onto a floor. You don't know where anything is. You have to ask a lot of questions and be annoying, and you don't know the doctors, and you don't know the way they like to work, and you don't know the flow of the floor. So there are some cons to it, and then the pros are, I feel like I have some good time off. I can take as much time off as I want to in between contracts. And they are only 13 weeks, so I stay out of the drama that goes along with the politics of the floor. But I miss working with a group of people consistently. When I worked at the hospital that I worked at in New Bedford, we were great. I'm still friends with all of them. I love them so much. They taught me so much, and I miss working with them all the time. So there's that aspect.
Yeah, pros and cons. Yeah. But at the end of the day, too, you're helping people. And I think that's the overall message too of the whole podcast. Just being a nurse is, if you're going to go down this career path, make sure that you want to actually help people, and not just do it for financial reasons. Because
it's not the way to go about it.
So unfortunately, I think a lot of people do make that mistake when they get into any career, is they see the dollar sign. I mean, when I looked at, at the same time, I understand you got to be practical, got to be realistic. Everyone has bills, like. Especially if you're going to college is expensive. You got to figure out a way to pay it back. Yep. I don't recommend, if you're going to go for those art degrees and things like that, it's very difficult. You're probably not going to make a lot of money. Just make sure, if you're going to do it, make sure you love that shit. Because
even nursing though, if you go to school for nursing and you go to a community college, you can get the same, like you can get a license and an associate's degree from a community college, and it's going to cost you way less money than it would at a university.
I always try to preach that too while in the podcast. It's just like, community college has such negative stigma to it that is like unnecessary, for one, and two, you get the same piece of paper at the end of it. Like, there's no point. If I could go back in time, I would have. I didn't even live. I went to UMass, Dartmouth. Didn't even live. I lived on campus for 1 year. Hated it. Like, I just not a people party person. Like, and that school wasn't even like that. And even a little bit was just like, I did it. I'm like, not for me. And my whole thing's like, if I want to just go out and get drunk, I'll just go back home with my friends, with people I actually care about, and just do it with them. Like, it just never made sense to me. And if I could have redid it, I would have went to community college, or I would have actually went out of state and went somewhere different. That probably would have been maybe a little bit more beneficial. I probably would have got more out of it than just local. But break down to it, financial reasons always kind of weigh on you at the end of the day. So
I know it's always that factor.
So I mean, just being a little bit realistic on that. We'll start wrapping up the podcast. I do have one more question for you, which is tied to passions. But is there anything that you want to say, or that you haven't got a chance to say or bring up yet?
No.
All right, cool. So the last question that I have for you, and I'm just take as long as you need to elaborate on your answer. What would your advice be to someone who wants to pursue their passion?
Ooh. I would say that there's no time like the present. And you have to, today's day one, just go after it. I mean, your passion is a big part of your life, and everybody has a different one, and you shouldn't be afraid to just do it. Just start today.
Perfect. I love that. Marleigh, thank you for coming on to this podcast. I appreciate you for coming on here, setting up time out of your very busy schedule to do this with me. Appreciate you. And again, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate you. And I'll give you guys the spiel now. If you guys like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, share with your family, share with your grandma. You can check it out at thecarrollconnection.simplecast.com. Also available Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all the major listening platforms. So until next time, guys, peace.
Bye, guys.